In this tutorial, we're going to learn about post-processing effects. Alright, so up to this point we've added our skybox and all of our lights, and now what we want to do is kind of put a little bit more polish onto our level or our environment here. So one way to do that is to use post-processing effects. Now this sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not. Okay, if you just break it down bit by bit here. So to get started here, the first thing that we want to do is we want to be able to see our post-processing effects inside of our environment. So to do this, let's go ahead and go to our content browser. And inside of my content browser, you're going to see the UT3 folder and go to Effects here. And you're going to see a package called FX Hit Effects. So go ahead and click on that. And in here, if we double click on this, if we come in here, we're going to be able to see these post-process chains in here. Now the one that I want to deal with here is just going to be the UT post process. So let's double click on this, and you're going to see that it brings up our Unreal Process Editor here. And with this, all we want to do here is just enable the post-processing effects inside of our editor. So to do this, let's go to Post-Process Effect, and then here we see Show in Editor. Go ahead and check that, and then we'll close this down. Now you could save this package if you want, but this is going to be a default package, and it's going to give you a warning if you try to save this. So if I hit save, it's going to bring this up saying that do I want to save over the startup package? Normally I don't want to do this. You can if you want, if you feel comfortable doing that. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that. Now it's going to still allow us to change those post-processing effects and have them take effect in our editor, whether we save that or not. So let's go ahead and close our content browser. Now let's go to our views, and then we're going to go to world properties. Now in our world properties, you'll see that we have several different menus here. And whenever we're dealing with post-processing effects, the main one that we want to deal with is going to be our rendering panel here. So in this, you can see that we have the default post-processing settings here. And so if I expand this down, you'll see that I have several different options that I can choose from. And these all have to deal with our post-processing effects. So a couple of common ones that we'll see are things like bloom scale, which if we enable that and we give it a value of, let's say, 1, if we go in here next to our lights, you're going to notice that they're going to have a little bit of bloom on them. Now let's take that scale up even further. Let's go to something like 2, and you'll see that that bloom begins to happen there. Okay, so bloom scale is a pretty neat one there. You can go ahead and give it a tint if you want to do so, but normally I don't like to deal with that too much. Now we also have depth of field, and this is a really cool effect because whenever we enable this, anything that's far away becomes a little bit blurry, and this gives us a really neat effect. Now with these options enabled, what it allows us to do is go ahead and start to modify some of these other parameters that we see in here. So we have our depth of field focus type. So right now it's set to distance by default. We can set that to position, and that's going to give us a little bit of a different field there. Okay, so it's not going to focus so much on distance there. But I go ahead and just leave it at distance. Okay. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and leave that on or turn it off if you like. It's totally up to you. Now what I wanted to deal with in this lesson was changing the overall look of my environment. And you can see here with your scene highlights, midtones, and shadows, we can do that. So let's go ahead and expand those out. Now we can come in here and we can start to input different values and get different colors to our scene, and we can really begin to really push the color of our scene altogether. Now normally whenever you're dealing with post-processing effects and you have some lighting and things like that in here, with it set, you'll notice that we get a lot of bright colors in here. And what I like to do is I like to set my scene desaturation. So normally, if we have it set to 1, you'll notice it's totally gray. If we have it set to 0, this is our regular colors. So if you desaturate it a little bit, that's going to give you a little bit more of a better result when working with these. Now on your scene highlights, you'll notice that we have X, Y, and Z, and that may not make much sense to you seeing how with color we're dealing with red, green, and blue. Well, if you just think of X as red, R, and then you think of Y as green and then Z as blue, it's going to make perfect sense now. Alright, so let's come in here and let's start to just kind of tweak some of these values. So what I like to do is just come in and start to kind of push some of these values up and down, okay, trying to get the look that I want to go for. So I'm going to bring this down, let's go to around 0.6 or so, kind of like where we're going with this. And usually on your highlights you kind of want to pull those down to a mid value between 0 and 1. Okay, trying to get the look that you want here. And I just kind of play with some of these values until I get exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, so I'm kind of bringing some of those blues back in there, kind of giving it kind of this purple effect, okay, which I'm okay with. We have our midtones, which we can start to adjust. I can come in here and start to adjust these values. I'm okay with 1, so I'm going to type that in. I don't want to stray too far from this. Go up a little bit, just kind of push that purple tone just a little bit more. And then on our midtones and our blue, I'm going to pull that down. Okay, so go down just a little bit further. Okay, so we're kind of getting this kind of a dreary look to our level. It seems to work pretty well with our interior lights. I like the way that looks there. Now we also have our scene shadows, shadows, yes, and we can go ahead and pull these down. Now normally by pulling these values down, what you're going or push them up just a little bit, is you're just going to get a little bit more contrast out of your level here. So I'm going to type in these values. So I'm going to go to 0.01 on my X and Y, and then on my Z I'm going to go to 0.02, just to kind of push those values a little bit further. Now I can come in and I can start to tweak these values a little bit more. So I'm going to go to like 0.7 on this one, just kind of bring that back up. And it kind of gives me this Polaroid type of effect where we get pulling out a lot of the reds and blues, kind of giving it a little bit of a purple tint to it. Okay, so it's kind of a neat little effect. Now you have several other options that you can play around with in here as well. We're not going to get into those because just with the amount of information that we could get into can be very, very daunting. So I really don't want to get into that too much. Now we can turn off that depth of field at this point if we want to. That's totally up to you. So you can turn that off or leave it enabled, okay, if you want to do so. Normally I don't like to set up my depth of field too much. If I have it turned on, I will tweak those values to where it doesn't blur out the sky so much, okay, because you can still see the sky if it's that far away. But it does kind of give you a neat effect whenever you're in buildings like this. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the overall color of this. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and then we're going to close our world properties, okay, our world info properties there. So now that we've talked about just kind of the basics of post-processing, what we're going to do in our next lesson is we're going to finish off this level by adding in some sounds and talking about how we can control that. All right, so I'll see you in the next lesson.